Hey there, creators. Welcome back to the Dear Creator YouTube channel. If this is your first time, hey, I am dating Daniela. My primary goal on this channel is to practicing critical thinking. I'm practicing creative thinking on the good, and I'm applying it to my self-awareness journey live and in person. So I'll be sharing some insights and some stories from my own life, but mostly I'll be sharing content from creators with thought-leading agendas. I'll be sharing content from the media. I'll be sharing content that may have inspired me in one way or the other. Maybe it inspired me to dig in a little bit deeper, or maybe triggered me and I want to understand why these happen. So I'm inviting you all to this experience with me so you can see it as I record on this YouTube, and invite you all to create your own self-awareness journey to get closer to being something that helps humanity as a whole. And I'm also inviting you all to create your own self-awareness journey to understand what triggers you, what inspires you, and to create something powerful out of it. Whether that be labeled bad, whether it be labeled good, what can we do with the stories and the content that we consume and with the content that we create? So recently I did a video, and it was about a young man named Charlie Kirk and his views on DEI. He said that it created bad people. And I would say that, I don't know if the trigger was a huge trigger, but I would say, why does he think this way? The reason why I said, why does he think this way is because I find interest in DEI. On the surface level, I am not a certified DEI specialist consultant. I just, on the surface level, think there's an opportunity here to have creative conversations, to have healthy conversations, to get everyone at the table to talk, because we haven't really talked about the things that we keep quiet. Like in Charlie Kirk's message that I shared in the last video, he would keep something like this quiet, but it takes a lot of guts to say these things out loud and to be able to create a safe place where, hey, I think this way, and it might not be the right way, but perhaps someone outside of me can add some context. Maybe someone outside of me can help correct this feeling because of their experience and what I might be missing. And so I want to continue with this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm investigating this. I want to investigate why people are against it, why people are for it, and how we can move forward with all of the different programs that we have had that mirrors diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actually get somewhere redeeming the time with wisdom. How are we going to do this today? So I have another video of someone who is against DEI, and he is known in the investment world. His name is Warren Buffett. And so Warren Buffett is someone that people might listen to. They say, hey, he's able to make money, so we should listen to this guy because he has created these businesses, he invests properly, he makes good decisions. And so let's stick with this idea of making good decisions and listening to what Warren Buffett says. But of course, I have lots to say before we get to the Warren Buffett video. So I'm just going to give us a chance to pause right here and make time for scripture. Isn't it amazing? Scripture time. I thought that this was so, let me just tell you about my day just a little bit. I'm living my life in America and I say, hey, I am going to church today, which I appreciate the church that I went to today because it is diverse and I love diversity. It's just so much color, so many different experiences, wonderful. And this is how I imagine the kingdom looking like, not just the people that look like me or not just me and a group of the people who don't look like me, but diversity, right? So when I went to church today, there was a message and the message was amazing. I love messages because messages are amazing. But what really inspired me to continue with this video is the scripture that was shared. So I'm going to use the scripture in a different perspective as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because when I heard it, I said, oh, I can use that in the video today. So that's what I'm going to go through first. I'm going to share the scripture and the story. Then we're going to go through the Warren Buffett video. I'm going to give you my takeaways. I want you in the comments to let me know your takeaways. And then we're going to go through 10 different reasons why people are against diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then provide prompts for each of those reasons for people who are against diversity, equity, and inclusion. This was a lot of content going through my mind. So this is not even the bit of what I wanted to cover. There's so many different questions that I have about diversity, equity, and inclusion that I want to explore. And so actually, 1 second. I have the list of things that on the top of my head right now as I'm going through this investigation that I'm interested in finding out. So one is, why does it exist? Can we get to the understanding of why diversity, equity, and inclusion exist, why these programs exist? Does DEI bring any value? And if it does, how? Are there any industries that should consider removing DEI efforts and why? What does that look like? If DEI was effective, what does that look like? What does it look like? Look like. So in an ideal world, for the person who is an advocate of DEI, who's a consultant already in the space, what does it look like? When we get to that picture where we can say, this is effective. What are we looking for? What are the KPIs there? This next one is, can we ensure that DEI isn't the practice of hiring someone just because they're different? I think that's one of the reasons that we'll explore later on in the video. How do we create opportunities for people to catch up because of disadvantages that were set before them? And I also want us to consider that these are disadvantages. There are disadvantages from our history on one side or the other. And then there's this fear of actually taking hold of the future and doing something different with it that we might be able to tap into. And mostly, how do we redeem the time? From my understanding of DEI is this has just changed in its label over the years, but DEI has started with initiatives that's related to civil rights, and it's changed which groups are a part of DEI, and the goal is still the same. We're thinking about how to be better to one another as it relates to social equality. The fact that we are still working on this says a lot. And so we might need to apply some wisdom to help us redeem the time, because should it be this difficult for us to explore diversity, equity, and inclusion? So again, I have to answer this question. What is diversity, equity, and inclusion? What exactly does that mean? So I'll go ahead and place it on the screen for us. Diversity, the presence of differences within a given setting. This can include differences in race, gender, age, religion, disability, sexual orientation, social economic status, education, national origin. Diversity is about recognizing and valuing differences in individuals and groups. Equity involves ensuring fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people, while striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. This focus on equity, it recognizes the advantages and barriers exist, and that as a result, we don't all start from the same place. Equity is a process that begins by acknowledging that unequal starting place and makes a commitment to correct and address the imbalance. And inclusion is the practice of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel welcome, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate. An exclusive and welcoming climate embraces differences and offers respect in words and actions for all people. I think what's fair about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that there is this understanding that some people have had a head start. Some people might even have more gifts than others. And so when I think about the Bible, I don't think it's necessarily that this person has more advantages or this person has less advantages. It's just the understanding that if we all started from the start line with the same, just started from the start line together, right? There wasn't anything that stopped us or reduced us. And then we used our gifts, that everybody's gift would be impactful and effective in one way or the other, even though we might not have all 10 gifts, 9 gifts, 8 gifts, right? I don't think I can build a house. Maybe if I put my heart and my mind and my body and my soul, and I just said, God, build this house for me, and it all worked out that way, potentially. From what I've understand about myself, you cannot have me build a house. You definitely cannot have me as your doctor. The way that my mind works, there's going to be a mistake. And so I wouldn't put myself in that position. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, from my perspective and what I'm understanding about it, and I could have this all wrong, is, hey, don't make it intentionally harder for people and say that they can't do this because they believe in this X, Y, and Z. Just don't make it intentionally harder for people. If you have a gift, you've been gifted with this, it should definitely qualify you for wherever your gift is supposed to be. So this is one element of diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that we do have to have some element of understanding ourselves. Where exactly do we want to put our effort? Because we can think, hey, because of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I should be in this room, but maybe you shouldn't be in that room. I have to understand which rooms I am supposed to be in, and at the same time know that if I have, now I'm going to speak for myself. because I think that religion or faith or spiritual beliefs has a place in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm going to use my framework for making decisions in this life. I'm going to use scriptures. I'm going to use the Bible as a foundation. I'm going to look at how Christ interacted and see where I can match that in my life. So from my perspective, if I have a gift and I look to my creator for understanding on how to use this gift, I am going to be in a position to exercise that gift. With this in mind, there should be no one in my way making it intentionally worse for me, because I'm already in that position. But then I can go back and say, well, would God put people in my way to make it harder? Perhaps, because that might be part of the journey. With all that being said, I am going to switch gears and share the scripture that I referred to earlier today to help us move this conversation along from a biblical lens. You don't have to be with the understanding that I am going to use the biblical lens. You don't have to use a biblical lens. You are expected to just engage intentionally, mindfully, to have respect in the way that you are sharing your data or your stories or your insight. When we operate that way, in my opinion, people can hear you a lot more clearly. Because if you are going to be condescending or make fun of people, you automatically default to, hey, I don't want to hear anything you have to say because your delivery is off. Now, okay. What is the scripture? Ecclesiastes 9:13-16. I'm going to read this aloud with you all, and then we're going to dig into this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation with a snippet from Warren Buffett. Now, as I read this scripture, for those who might not be into the Bible, interested in the Bible, but into stories, look at it from a stories lens as we apply this for some input of wisdom. So Ecclesiastes is a book that is written by King Solomon, and King Solomon, from my understanding, was one of the most wisest men to live. And so as he's sharing this perspective, he's pouring from his experience and history and saying, hey, this is wise, being that he's also a wise man. So 13 says, this wisdom have I seen also under the sun, and it seemed great unto me. There was a little city and a few men within it, and there came a great king against it and besieged it and built great bulwarks against it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no man remembered the same poor man. Then said I, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. So why did I share the scripture with you? What does it mean for DEI? When I think about this story, let's think of it as a story. I'm thinking of the value of diverse perspectives. We see that someone who is a poor man is sharing some insight that actually saved a city. From the way that I've navigated this earth, it always seems that the only people that you're supposed to glean anything from has to look a certain way, be a certain way, acquire certain things. And perhaps that's true. But the diversity of it all is there's somebody who probably hasn't acquired it, but their wisdom still is effective. Let me know, is that poor? Is that too much of a reach? The next thing is about equity and recognition. So despite this man being able to save a city, no one remembered him. No one even mentioned him. And we see this sometimes when it comes to things in the past that were credited to people who didn't create that invention or didn't have that thought, but because of their color, they were in the background. These are the type of experiences where we think, well, they added value. And because we didn't like the color of their skin, or we didn't want to give them credit, or we didn't want to look like we were small and not smart enough, we took it from them. Then there's this idea of inclusion and listening. I can think, hey, this rich man is the only man I need to listen to because he has all the facts. But perhaps on that porch is an old wise man who's poor, but who has observed all the things that can give you the answer that you cannot receive because you complicated so much that has your answers. And then the last thing I want to take from this is just the overall use of wisdom. Wisdom and the decision to operate in wisdom or to receive wisdom, ask for wisdom, is going to help us redeem the time. It shouldn't really have taken this many years to get to a point where we can at least stop making making intentional laws or intentional barriers for people because of a fear or a lack of, or something that's going on with self. If everything is perfect how it is, then we wouldn't have people crying. Would we? I don't know. Because sometimes people complain and they ask for a king and then they're still complaining. So for me, when I'm thinking from a faith lens, there is this power that we put in men, and we want the men to change it. We want them to change all their systems. We want them to do all the things. But then there might be power within ourselves that we're not tapping into because we don't have a direct connection to help us pull through that power. Or it could be all the other things. So I know that there's so many different narratives with this. And so I'm just going to stop there because I did not come to be a Bible teacher. I just love the stories in the Bible and how effective they have been when it comes to seeing fruit in my personal life. And so I'm bringing this into the conversation because diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have to exercise the diversity that I come from because most people will say, hey, I identify her as a woman who is Black or African American. And then I say, well, I identify myself as a person surviving Earth in America who is using the Bible as a lens and a guide through all of these things. That's using examples from the Bible and Jesus Christ's walk in order to navigate this whole Earth experience. So I would identify with that entire sentence, but you can't put that sentence on an application because everybody's not gonna check that except for me. No one else is gonna check that beyond me. But is there room for that conversation that I don't want to be identified how you identify me? I want to be identified the way that I want to be identified. So those are some of the questions that I have. So now that we've gotten through what I thought was most important, which was the scripture from the Bible, I have a new question. Can a rich man teach us about DEI? So I want to look at this video from Warren Buffett, and he's responding to the concepts of DEI.
24 men and women work with you, Warren, at our corporate office. I see from last year the quality of the picture has been improved in the annual report, so congratulations on that. However, looking at it, there is something that comes to anyone's attention, and is the lack of diversity among the staff. A 2015 analysis by Calvert Investments found that Coca-Cola was one of the best companies for workplace diversity, while Berkshire Hathaway was one of the worst. You've explicitly stated that you do not consider diversity when hiring for leadership roles and board members. Does that need to change? Are we missing any investment opportunities as a result? And do you consider diversity, however defined, of company leadership and staff when analyzing the value of a company that you may want to purchase?
Well, it's a multiple part question. The answer to the last one is no. What was the one before it?
You've explicitly stated you do not consider diversity when hiring for leadership roles and board members. Does that need to change? And are we missing any investment opportunities as a result?
No, we will select board members, and we lay it out, and we've done so for years. And I think we've been much more explicit than most companies. We are looking for people who are business savvy, shareholder oriented, and have a special interest in Berkshire. And we found people like that. And as a result, I think I think we've got the best board that we could have. They're not in it. They're clearly not in it for the money. I get called by consulting firms who've been told to get candidates for directors for other companies, and by the questions they ask, it's clear they've got something other than the three questions we ask in terms of directors in mind. They really want somebody whose name will reflect credit on the institution, which means a big name, and one organization recently, the one that did the blood samples with small pricks, they got some very big names on their board, and Theranos, I think, is that the way you pronounce it, Charlie? Theranos, yeah, and I mean the names are great, but we're not interested in people that want to be on the board because they want to make $200,000 or $300,000 a year, for 10% of their time. And we're not interested in the ones for whom it's a prestige item. and who want to go and check boxes or that sort of thing. So I think we will continue to apply that test, business savvy, shareholder oriented, and with a strong personal interest in Berkshire. And every share of the Berkshire that our shareholders own, they bought just like everybody else in this room. They haven't gotten them on option, or they haven't gotten, I've been on boards where they've given me stock. I get it for breathing, basically. At half a dozen places that are maybe 3 or 4 that I was on the board of. We want our shareholders to walk in the shoes, our directors to walk in the shoes of shareholders. We want them to care a lot about the business, and we want to be smart enough so that they know enough about business that they know what they should get involved in and what they shouldn't get involved in. The people in the office, I'm hoping that when we take the Christmas picture again this year, they're exactly the same 25 that were there last year, even though we might have added 30,000 employees elsewhere and maybe 10 billion of sales or something like that. It's a remarkable group of people. And just take this meeting. Virtually every one of the 25, our CFO, my assistant, whoever, they've been doing job after job connected with making this meeting a success and a pleasant outing for our shareholders. It's a cooperative effort. The idea that you would have some department called annual meeting department, and you'd have a person in charge of it, and he would have an assistant, and then they would go to various conferences about holding annual meetings and build up, and then they'd hire consultants to come in and help them on the meeting. We just don't operate that way, and it's a place where everybody helps each other. Part of what makes my job is extraordinarily easy, but the people around me really make it easy. And part of the reason it's easy is because we don't have any committees. Maybe we have some committee I don't know about, but I've never been invited to any committees. I'll put it that way at Berkshire. And we may have a PowerPoint someplace. I haven't seen it, and I wouldn't know how to use it anyway. We just don't have make work activities, and we might go to a baseball game together or something like that. But I've seen the other kind of operation, and I like ours better. I'll put it that way. Charlie?
Well, years ago, I did some work for the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Los Angeles. And my senior partner pompously said, you don't need to hire us to do this. There's plenty of good Catholic tax lawyers. And the Archbishop looked at him like he was an idiot and said, Mr. Peeler, he says, last year I had some very serious surgery and I did not look around for the leading Catholic surgeon. That's the way I feel about board members.
All right, as the crowd cheers. I thought this was interesting, and here's why I'm sharing this video. One, I wanted to answer this question in my last video, and I wanted to take a little bit of time. So there's going to be multiple videos because there's so much to cover, and I still am talking very much. I wanted to see another perspective on why diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't recommended or isn't the desired choice. That didn't lean towards like a scrunchy face. Now, I have to admit that once I heard someone say that diversity, equity, and inclusion creates bad people, my face did scrunch up because I had a lot of questions. Like, scrunchy face means you have questions and it might bother you a little. So now I'm looking from a perspective of, hey, America, the people in it will say, look at the fruit of people. If this man is a rich man and he's created good decisions and created these businesses, then we might listen to him. But the reason why I shared the poor man scripture is because we can learn from both. We can learn a perspective from the rich man and how he sees business, as well as that poor man who's unnamed and how he can actually save a city with his perspective. And honestly, there were so many, I just wanted to narrow it down to 10, but these are a few reasons why people are against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I want to present some questions along with these reasons for those who are against diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for those who are advocates of it to consider. So I'm going to go ahead and list these on a board as I go. And then as as you journey with me, you let me know, what are your thoughts on some of these reasons? What type of questions would you insert into the conversation? Ultimately, can we all sit at the table, be diverse, but understand where we need to be placed as it relates to our gifts? Just because we want to include everyone doesn't mean that everyone needs to be included everywhere. However, we might miss out on wisdom just because we intentionally dismiss people from the table because of fear. That's a theory that I have. You let me know what your thoughts are. So let's start with the 10 reasons why people are against diversity, equity, and inclusion. 1, misunderstanding of DEI goals. Some individuals might misunderstand what DEI aims to achieve. They might perceive it as a zero-sum game where promoting opportunities underrepresented groups will disadvantage others. This misunderstanding can lead to the belief that DEI initiatives are unfair or discriminatory against groups who have traditionally held power or been in the majority. So I'm curious, you all, after hearing this first reason why people are against diversity, equity, and inclusion, what's your takeaway? What are your questions? Here's one to consider. How can we better communicate that DEI initiatives aim to create fair chances for everyone rather than disadvantaging any other group? What exactly would we need to say? What exactly would we need to show for both sides to be comfortable with DEI initiatives? All right, here's the second one. Fear of change. So DEI initiatives often involve changes to existing structures, practices, and norms. This can provoke anxiety or resistance among those who feel comfortable with the status quo or fear that changes might affect their own status or job security. Is that fair? I think that's fair. That's a fair reason to be against it, especially if it looks like it's not helpful. But is this a story that's created in our mind? Are we creating stories that look for the worst versus being creative with our thought and thinking on the good? But again, we would have to identify what good is for each group. Is so diverse. Is what good cult-like? But on the basic level of humanity, is it okay to be fair and just? So here's my question for the fear of change. What steps can we take to alleviate fears associated with change and demonstrate the long-term benefits of a more inclusive workplace? I'm interested in the comments. Do you have an answer for that? Or do you have any other questions centered around the fear of change? As I see it, it does feel like we are walking through this change together as if we're working with babies. And as a mother, I would say that sometimes when I'm listening to the disputes online, even with the people who are using the most educated terms and data and sources, there's still this sense of holler-like reaction that we're not pausing to reflect or take time to input wisdom. We're just thinking that it's not fair. Why do we think that it's not fair? On both sides. What are we placing ourselves in a victim mentality on both sides? And I know that could be weird for those who are considered the majority. It's how can they be a victim? Well, when I tell you I have a lot to talk about, I have a lot to talk about, but on both sides. All right, so let's look at another one together. The third one is lack of visible impact. So some critics argue that DEI initiatives have not effectively achieved their goals or have not demonstrated clear benefits. They haven't implemented any measurable outcome, or they poorly implemented or fail to produce measurable outcomes. So what is the question here? How can we better track and communicate the positive outcomes and benefits of DEI efforts, both in short-term and long-term spaces? How can we do it? I'm interested. And these questions are for both sides. Because if we say that we're against something, we first understand why we're against it. We make a clear argument why we're against it or for it. And then we realize, hey, I live in a world amongst all these people, and these people are at an uproar about this. So maybe we're missing some points. In the same breath, are there people who make an uproar or complain about nonsense? How do we identify that it's pure nonsense? It's hard in this case when I talk about DEI for us to say it's nonsense that the entire group that's advocating for DEI don't have any merit in wanting diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially given historical context. When I think about redeeming time and using wisdom to redeem the time and focusing on the present, if it's been so many years and the king isn't giving us what we want, or even God has hardened the heart of the pharaohs, is there some other strategy that that we can use so that we don't have to go to this table where they don't want us? And can you go to tables that are hearing you out for DEI and continue to show the effectiveness of DEI in these groups? I think mentioned in this video, the idea was that Coca-Cola was a company that embraced DEI and that company was successful. And so that could be mirrored. So we had to also leave room for different industries and different gifts. So maybe one industry can be a little bit more diverse and they can just bring people on because of these merits. But maybe in other groups, you can start with saying, hey, everyone can come here, but if you can't pass the test, you can't pass the test. And then the next layer is, are these groups of minorities not passing the test because there's something off with that test? Is that test catered to one particular group in the way that they see the world? Or is that test a test that leaves people out intentionally? There's probably more questions that we can go through as it relates to if someone qualifies or not. Because the way that we might qualify someone is going to be based off of our own personal experience. Every person who's hiring has a background. They have experiences that they're bringing into the table. And no matter how many systems that we can put in place, they might just choose who they like. And that could be the same for the people who are advocates of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They could just choose someone just because of their color and not go through the entire process of, hey, but I want you to know that you can only go through this opportunity if you're good, if you're qualified, if you're going to add value. Okay, getting a little passionate. I'm getting a little passionate, so let's move on. Perceived threat to meritocracy. This is a common argument that DEI initiatives undermine meritocracy. The idea that success should be based solely on individual ability and effort. Critics often claim that prioritizing diversity can lead to lowering standards or overlooking merit. So the question here is, how can we redefine meritocracy, if we need to include diverse perspectives and experiences that actually enhance performances and innovation? Because the thing is, when Warren Buffett is speaking in this video, he says, I hope that these people are the same the next year. And I believe that when we speak out loud and we are honest about these things instead of trying to hide because of how people want us to say things, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because these are diversity of thoughts as well, coming from different backgrounds and experiences, and the fears. Even our fears are coming to the table. It's fair here to have that question. It's also fair to challenge that question and say, well, at one point we were riding on horses. I use this example all the time because it's my favorite. At one point, we were riding on horses, and someone could have said, hey, we've been riding on these horses all our lives, and we don't need to change anything. But someone with a diverse perspective, a progressive perspective, comes into the conversation and they say, hey, but what if we could do this? And so although we can keep things the same, there's something that adds when we switch it up a little bit. We just have to be wise enough to know when to make these changes, where to make these changes. All right, moving on. The next reason why people are against diversity, equity, and inclusion is the overemphasis on identity. So DEI initiatives place too much emphasis on identity categories such as race, gender, and sexual orientation, potentially leading to identity politics where people are primarily seen through the lens of their group identity rather than as individuals. This can be perceived as reducing individuality and promoting division. It's interesting. So here's the questions to consider. How can we balance identity acknowledgement with the need to treat everyone as individuals with unique contributions? Now, these questions are only here because we're practicing. I don't even know if we're going to have the right question or if it's going to work. But my challenge is, if we are able to create the technology that we've created, if we're able to use the big words and use the data, how can we use the big words and the data and all the things to think on the good, to go in a direction that does feel like we can experience heaven on earth by the way that we treat one another? Most of this is coming from our experiences, our fears, and our lack of self-awareness, our lack of the lack desire to better ourselves with our weaknesses. That's a theory. I gotta say that. That's a theory. All right, so the next one is perceived inequity. So ironically, efforts to promote equity can sometimes be seen as creating new forms of equity. For example, affirmative action policies have been criticized by some who believe that they unfairly disadvantage those who do not belong to the groups that these policies intend to support. Now, I also want to bring this to the subject of equity versus equality. So some opposition arises from misunderstanding of these two terms, because while equity involves giving more to those who need it to ensure fair outcomes, equality involves treating everyone the same. Critics who favor equality might oppose equity initiatives, viewing them as inherently unfair. Okay. So how can we explain the differences between equity and equality more clearly to help everyone understand the importance of fair treatment based on different starting points? All right. So the next one we have is misapplication and overreach. So some oppose DEI initiatives on the grounds that they can sometimes be applied in ways that seem excessive or unrelated to the core functions of an organization. This could include instances where DEI principles are interpreted or implemented in ways that seem to stifle free speech or academic freedom. So the question I pair with this is, what mechanisms can we implement to ensure that DEI efforts are appropriately aligned with our organization's primary goals and values? The next one is legal and compliance concerns. So in some cases, we're thinking, especially around affirmative action and quota systems, which are legally contentious in some jurisdictions. Opponents may argue that certain DEI practices could expose organizations to legal challenges or compliance issues. So how can we design DEI strategies that respect legal frameworks while effectively promoting diversity and inclusion? So we're really just looking at questions of how can we do it? We are, sometimes it seems like we're smart people. We are definitely creative. And this is why I love the fact that there's some of us operate more in our left brain and some of us operate on more than our right brain, because once we come together with both of those strong gifts, then we're a powerhouse. All right, so this next one is ideological purity test. I thought this one was interesting. In some environments, there may be a perception that DEI initiatives include implicit tests of ideological purity, where individuals feel pressure to conform to viewpoints to demonstrate their commitment and diversity and inclusion. This can lead to resistance from those who feel that such conformity undermines genuine diversity of thought. And so the question we pair here is, how can we ensure that our DEI efforts genuinely foster diverse viewpoints without imposing a single ideological standard? We have this last one here, preference for homogeneity. So when it comes to personal and professional environments, believing that similarity among members leads to smoother interactions and less conflict. So the efforts to increase diversity can be seen as disrupting the preferred equilibrium. Now I have to, before I let you all go, I wanted to talk about that just briefly and then close out with two different studies that you guys can get into, one supporting DEI and one against it. When I thought about this last one, I said, I can see this, because there was a point in time where I worked for a company, and this is a space in my life where I was a little bit upset with what I thought God was in my life at this point. And so I was distant from my upbringing and things of that nature. And I said, I don't really want to, I don't really know what I believe in. And I was living my life that way. But apparently it just will not escape me. It will not escape me. And I'm thankful for this. But what happened is I ended up working for a job, and I'm not even sure if this was intentional or not, but I started to learn that the job identified themselves as Christian. And I don't think they ever told me this, or I don't remember them ever saying it, but I started to see this in one way or the other. And one way I saw it is that all the different types of clients that we had also identified themselves as Christian. And so in this space, although they identified themselves as Christians and they didn't know what I identified, I'm not sure if it was assumed or what was the case, but I never came into the application saying, I believe in God, I am a Christian. And I had my personal views during this time because I was transitioned from all the different things I've been studying and all the different experiences I was having with the questions I had about God at that time. But I was in this place and I saw what that looked like, to have an organization that truly wanted to practice with value. And I saw the increase with this business. And I saw just the functionality of just having these principles that we believe in and what that means. And so is there room in diversity, equity, and inclusion to say, hey, if you believe in this and you want to work, and if we believe in this as a company and you want to work here, are you able to be okay with this? And the same thing for if you're going to be more open to all the things and all the different experiences that people can have, are you okay that you're working for a company that has views that might be different than your views as a Christian, or your views as someone who believes in a faith against some of the things in this diverse room, or someone who is an advocate for just having people who look like them in the boardroom. These are the things that we have to identify and also answer these questions, because if I say that I want to work for a company who is peaceful, who's fair, who use values that don't steal, kill, murder, all the bad things, then I need to look for that type of company. If I find a company who completely tells me that they don't want to include people, then I make a decision not to work with them, because I can already foresee, saving and redeeming this time, that this group of people don't want me here. So why would I force myself to be there? And then the last option is, if I really believe in this, how do I create this system myself? I can't always lean on this system to want to care for me, but because of the world that I live in, and because things have changed, I'm not living in the same time that my ancestors did, I might be able to do something different. But I have to be willing to change this, because I'm taken away from their freedom of choice and their decision making. And I'm taken away from my decision making. I can choose life or death based off of what I can see in this earth. The earth is just full of different experiences that teaches us that we can go forward or we can go against it. And what I find interesting is we always keep trying to get people to like us that don't like us. And that's for anyone. They call it people pleasing. And I had this conversation with my therapist about it, because I thought, why are people so against pleasing the other person? But it's not really about pleasing the other person. It's pleasing these other people at the detriment of yourself, right? So if you're pleasing other people at the detriment of yourself, so if you are deciding that you're just going to go and work here be at the detriment of yourself, then you're doing yourself a disservice. All right, so I'm going to close out and share, and I'm just going to put these on the screen for you guys to look through it yourself. But this is how I want us to navigate these critical and creative thinking as I continue to go through these DEI conversations. Hopefully I'm getting a lot of it out in these first two videos that were long, and I can shorten them up. But you let me know, are you able to stay with me to the end? Are you finding any value for this? I would say that this video is for those who are DEI advocates, because we have to look at it from the full picture. If you're really trying to push your message through and you're a creator of DEI content, how do you approach these manners? And if you are against anything that's shared, what's an effective way for you to communicate those views? Using wisdom, right? What I learned today is, and what's actually common knowledge, but it does actually take practice, is we can live in a world and we can get upset and mad about all the things. But if we take time and understand what we're actually mad about and who we're going to react to, it might change the way that we respond. So for example, the example that I heard today is, let's say you are going to, actually I'm going to create my own example inspired by this one I heard today, because I've been here before. So let's say I'm going into a restaurant. When I get into the restaurant, the woman says, we don't do this anymore, and I get mad at that person who works there. I'm mad at them for something that has nothing to do with them. All they did was communicate the message. But the lack of wisdom is understanding that that particular person is not your problem. It's something bigger than that. And so when I think about this discussion about DEI and just how we go back and forth, even when we talk about left and right, sometimes we get mad at the individuals that's manipulated by some entity or some system that's causing it, instead of tapping into the power of coming together and realizing that we're all being manipulated and doing something about it in that capacity. Because do they really have as much power if we don't give them the power, if we navigate in a different direction using wisdom, not reacting but responding? So hey, let's explore this diversity, equity, and inclusion together to see how it actually does make a better experience for all people, or get as close as possible. Here are the two studies that I want to share with you. One against DEI, one for. So this first one is called Diversity Wins, How Inclusion Matters. It's dated for May 2020 by McKinsey and Company. And one of the key takeaways here is that the study underscores that companies with gender diverse executive teams were 25% more likely to experience above average profitability than companies with less diversity. It highlighted that diversity isn't just a metric to be strived for, it is an integral part of a successful business strategy. And then this one was against diversity. So it said the impact of corporate diversity quotas on company performance, and this was evidence from California, The date was March 2021, and it was by National Bureau of Economic Research. And one of their key takeaways is the study examines the impact of mandated diversity quotas on corporate boards in California. It finds that while the quotas did increase the diversity of boards, there were mixed outcomes regarding company performance. Some companies experienced decreased market value and increased operational efficiency, suggesting potential downsides to enforce diversity policies without proper strategic implementation. So check those studies out for yourself. Look at other studies. Always look at the studies for and against something, just to give you an understanding of what could be missing from this conversation that my bias might dismiss. What could be missing from this conversation that I can't even think of because of the bubble or the world that I lived in? That actually, if I tapped into this different perspective, it could be helpful. Or if I tap into this different perspective, it could help me strengthen what I already believe. All right, I did it. That's it. I would say that if you come to this channel now and I explore diversity, equity, and inclusion, me being authentic is that I am a talker. I'm also practicing and working through how I can be a better presenter. So this is a practice space for me. So you're watching me practice in live time. If you have any feedback on how to strengthen or how to shorten, or maybe it doesn't need to be shortened, because I imagine that I would go through presentations and I would perform workshops, not just to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that creative thinking process, that critical thinking process, practicing that and applying to our self-awareness journey. So I'm just using all different types of content, one being DEI at this moment. I think I might be here for a little bit because there's so much here to help us. But let me know in the comments what your takeaways were, any thoughts that you want to add to the conversation. Let me know if you're an advocate for, if you're against it, and intentionally, mindfully practice in the comments what reason you are for, against, or on the fence about it. Until next time, hold on to you as much as you can. Hold on to your health, your well-being, and your mind. Be mindful. Bye.